Delaware, no one knew Jack what she did. So now we get to dive deeper into Jack and his life and his painting. So welcome, Rebecca, and thank you very much for being here.
Okay, I tend to be loud, so we'll see how I make out with this one. First of all, Jack would be so joyful to see all of you. And he also would have been fascinated by the good doctor's talk and interjected a number of times, I'm sure. And for those of you that knew Jack, he was not shy. His paintings surely demonstrate his overload of self-confidence, as did the way he lived his life. I'm going to talk about many things, and I'm going to interject or change subjects, but always focus on Jack and some of my experiences with him. But before I go too far, I wanted to explain to you that one of the best ways to look at a Jack Lewis painting, he was a master of working with complementary colors in subtle and sometimes borderline rude ways, but the impact was that the painting never lost its power. So complementary colors are on the color wheel. So the complement of red is green, the complement of blue is orange, and the complement of purple is yellow. And you might find literally two bold strips, and one will be red, one will be green, or you might find he's done a muted green over here and a bold tiny piece of red over here. All that. When you look at the paintings, look for the complementary colors and how he has tapped that. Because even if it's one simple blue line in a painting that has some orange in it, without that blue line, that painting is not going to have the long-term strength that it does have. Jack was a lot of fun. I actually met him out here. I did the outdoor show in 1979 for the first time. And the two kings, which were Howard Schroeder and Jack Lewis, once I put my work up, I was like answering a million questions. They wanted to know how, what, when, where'd you come from? And that friendship with Jack lasted until his passing, 11 days shy of his 100th birthday.
Wow.
So he's a pretty amazing fellow, and I will say it was only the last couple of years, although he was in an assisted living. This is a wonderful story about Jack. He was in assisted living, but you could not stop that man from leaving wherever he was if the notion occurred to him. So he's in assisted living, and he has this idea for a sermon that his minister should give on the following Sunday. And out the door he went. Next thing you know, the minister has him he's knocking on the minister's door and comes in to talk to him. And I have a really good idea for your sermon. I have no idea what his idea was. I simply know that the minister was like, where did you come from? He was very good friends with Jack, and he visited him at the assisted living. But he was like, how did you get here? Because the assisted living was like 6 miles, maybe more, away from the church. And Jack looked at him indignant and said, I walked. And there's no alarms going off, and there's nobody stopped him from leaving. But that's typical Jack, and he ran away from me a few times when dealing with business, and he wanted to do something. He was truly a master of what he did. And many of us can sometimes look at something and say, well, I don't know what he was going for here, but I'll look again. And if you look, you'll find it. He loved the working man. So I certainly think his career at the CCC had a lot with kicking off that affection he had. I have seen pictures where he stops in the fields of Sussex County to do drawings of the field workers, of the migrant workers. Bean pickers is a wonderful group of paintings, drawings that he did. He drew all the time. I don't know if any of you have have seen the movie J.M.W. Turner, how he went around with a little book, Jack went around with a big packet of paints and watercolor paper. He got arrested several times because he would find some magnificent manor home and set up and start painting. And this was, I think, right after the war, and next thing you know, the police are coming, they're hauling him away, they think he's casing the joint. Since when they look at his paintings, they don't necessarily know what he's putting on there. And it happened repeatedly, and we would often be going through his portfolios, and he goes, oh yeah, I got arrested when I was doing that. You know, I got arrested when I was doing this one, and then they decided I was pretty harmless. He has, we actually, I love that there is some work from the World War II, when he was in the Pacific corridor. And he told me a story. I have seen volumes of the Pacific work, and everything is from beautiful tropical island to something mundane, you know, such as workers in a field or workers on a boat, and he gives it a level of importance and sensitivity that you might not otherwise see. But and also, apparently he did some drawings of some of the military stuff, aside from the portraits of men. And one day his commanding officer called him in and said, I need to bring your portfolio. So Jack came and he brought his portfolio. And every piece he did had some of his heart in it. It was dear and special to him, and he might immediately move on to another piece, but that doesn't mean the other work did not lose its relevance. And the commander starts going through, and he's got a big barrel with a flame going, and he starts throwing pieces away. Maybe Jack had a ship in it, maybe he just didn't like Jack. And he's throwing these things in the fire, and then the air raid drill goes off. And everybody runs for cover except for Jack. He stays in that room and he clusters all his stuff and he packs it all up and leaves the room and never shares his portfolio with his commander again. He would send packets of his paintings back to his aunt who lived in Annapolis, and I've seen the work where you flip it over and they open the mail, they inspected what he had sent back to his aunt, and they stamped that it had been read. So even his mail was exposed to opinions, so to speak. But luckily the aunt kept them all, and he had a nice body of work. And I think he took to sending them back to her on purpose, because he never wanted to see them going into the flaming wheelbarrow again. He also, if you look at his portraits in particular, there's no such thing as a set flesh color, and those of us that paint realize that completely. And you can look at some of his portraits, for instance, the man in the Big Apple shirt behind you. You know, I'd like you to count how many colors are on his face. I think you can find yellow, blue, red. You'll find a lot of colors. You'll also find more colors on here. Jack was not afraid, frankly, of anything. He just put them all together, and I mean, let's face it, the man got arrested for painting, so. And bold. In the early work, a lot of people feel strongly about his early work. They think that that is the way that he loved to paint and how he loved to paint. And so I actually put that question to Jack one time, and he said, no, I painted that way because I was paid to paint that way. That was his job. When he was in the military, he was supposed to paint, he was supposed to keep the troops entertained in whatever way he could. And those of us that know him, the harmonica was used many times, and I'm not sure if he had his accordion with him in the military. And I believe he actually met his wife Dorothy in the military. She was a whack. So it was a love story from the get-go. He loved, as I said, he loved industry, loved the water, and loved I think he just loved life and human beings, humankind. But in the earlier work, it's very specific, and I've actually found work from the late 60s that is very gestural and minimal in its treatment. It still follows through with the little kisses of complementary color to keep it fresh. But he preferred that. He told me, it's a more powerful piece if I can catch it in as few strokes as possible. And I have to believe him. He spoke with great love, and he was married. His wife was an artist as well, a ceramicist, and she also did silkscreen. So there's occasionally you'll see a silkscreen Jack Lewis, and that's because he collaborated with his wife Dorothy. So he was, and his puppets. The good doctor mentioned his puppets. His puppets were fabulous. They worked in theater. He and his wife were very active with the theater. And of course, walking. He walked everywhere. I lived in Dover for a long time with a house out on Route 8 extended, going east. And it was fairly far from downtown or whatever, and we were flying Jack in for different shows. He'd say, can I have a show this time? Can I have a show that time? Whatever. My husband and I would fly him in, and he was renting cars. I think he was 94, and I said, Jack, you rented a car? We would have picked you up at the airport. He goes, oh, I can drive. And so I called back home. This was when he had moved to York, Maine. I called back home and asked, how does Jack get his airline ticket? And his wife said, oh, he works with this man at the travel agency. I said, okay, and what is that number? And I called the gentleman, and he said, oh yeah, I organize all Jack's trips. And the problem with Jack having a car in '94 is, well, he would disappear. You know, he's well-loved, and different people would get a hold of him, and all of a sudden, he would be in Seaford, and it would be 3:30 in the afternoon, and we had a massive opening at 5, and I couldn't reach him. So I told the gentleman that was booking everything for him, I said, do you have any idea how old he is? He said, well, I figured he's about 73, 74. I said, try adding 20 years to that. And he said, oh my God, I could lose my license. We're doing this. I said, well, I highly recommend you don't do it again. So we brought Jack. Jack he couldn't understand why he wasn't allowed to rent a car. So we were able to we took him anywhere he wanted. If a friend was coming to take him someplace, just, give me the logistics so I know, you have to have him back at this time. And Jack, he came for this one event at our gallery, and we were setting up, and he liked to take an afternoon nap. And I mean, literally, he would lay down, sleep for an hour, then he was up good as new. So we took him home and showed him his bedroom where he was staying, and he got comfortable, and he said, I'll just take a nap. I'll be up in an hour and a half or so, then I need to go back in. My daughter at the time was about 11 years old. She was home. She calls us up, and she says, Jack left. We're like, what do you mean left? And she said, he went out the front door and down the lane and then started walking right. Walking. It turns out he was there's a lady reporter that he was very fond of, and she and her husband live out on the east side of Dover, almost to Route 9. And he had decided, he didn't tell my daughter, we just speculated that there was a darn good chance that's where he was headed. You had to pick and choose your direction. So we're driving, my husband Chris and I are driving out there, and there he is, out in the middle of nowhere, full stride, 90 plus years old, full stride. And we pull up next to him and said, where are you going? And to which he goes, I'm going to go visit Joanna and her husband. Are you sure you know where they live? I'm pretty sure it's down this road. Well, how about if you get in the car and we take you there? So and it was hard to get him in the car. I think he was concerned we were gonna turn around and take him home. But we took him to her house and no one was there. And all I can think of is if we got there and thought maybe that wasn't her house and went off looking for somebody else's house, because that was Jack. But he was strong. I will tell you, he was strong as an ox. Well into his 90s, my husband loves to fish, and he would take the canoe down somewhere just south of Milford, I think it was. Jack would get in the canoe with him, and if you know fishermen, they don't go out for 2 hours. They go out all day. And Jack would sit in that canoe and draw and paint, sitting in that canoe the whole time my husband fished. So you're looking at 5, 6, 7 hours in the canoe. Then they would come in, and Jack would, I think we need some refreshments. And Chris would say, "What, do you want a beer?" He said, "Yeah, and a whiskey." And they would then proceed to go somewhere and have a few drinks. And that, he held to that pattern. The last exhibit we had at my gallery for Jack, it was long. There was an exhibit at the Schwartz Theater to take place at a certain time of the reception, and then we were all to walk back to my gallery, which was 2.5, 3 block walk. We gave him a ride, but I don't think he needed it. And then we got to our gallery, hosted the opening, and there's a few of you here that have attended those openings, and they were elbow to elbow, packed, and everyone had a wonderful story and wanted to talk to Jack and share their memories. So we were finally, it was supposed to be, 7 to 9 or something, and we got out of there about 10 o'clock or so at night, and we're locking the front door of the gallery, and there's a little bar across the street, and he said, "Let's go get a drink." So the man lived life to the fullest. He did his paintings to the fullest. He lived his entire life to the fullest. He traveled extensively. I don't think there's too many corners of the world he hasn't been to. He taught at the air base. He taught art at the air base. And the last day of school, he'd go home, pack his bags, and leave the next day, which I think was a bit hard on Dorothy and the girls, and do something like go to Mexico, go to Peru. He had a scholarship. He was on a teaching program. He was in the British Isles, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and he loved his Italy. In the latter years of his life, he and his wife every summer would rent an apartment in Florence, and that would be their nucleus, their center. They would travel extensively, and he had some funny stories about that. But he loved Florence, and this apartment that they had every summer, Jack had it. It had a big balcony or raised. It was up on the second floor, and he could have a beautiful view of Florence and just stand out there and paint all he wanted. Landscape and water scenes especially, and people. It was a constant circle. He would do things all the time. And he also was very fond of the ladies. He was a bit of a flirt. He never flirted with me because I meant money. And there was one time he came to me and he said, "This lady's gonna come and pick up her painting, and oh my God, she's so poor. She and her child did not have any shoes on." And I said, "Jack, where did you meet this lady? At the beach?" I wouldn't take those shoes into consideration. And he's going, "If she doesn't have enough money, you just let her have it." Yeah, let me play that card, Jack. And then the day the woman was supposed to pick it up, she pulled up in front of my gallery and parked in it, which is a no parking zone, and got out of her car, which was a very, let's just say it was a very, very brand new, expensive car. and I mean really expensive car. And she came up and she goes, I'm here to pick up my Jack Lewis painting. I said, well, here it is, you know, and some shamefully low price that he had quoted her, and I'm ready to get me that. And she goes, oh, he said it would be framed. And he had, many of you know his classic little silver metal frames. I said, it is framed. That's a Jack Lewis frame. And to which she responded, but I don't like that one. And I said, well, I'd gladly make you a new one, you just have to pay me for it. Oh, I'll take that one. But that's the kind of, his heart would go out. He thought this woman, walking at the beach in Lewis, was poor because she didn't have shoes on. It was cute, but she got her painting. He was a lot of fun, Jack. He's a little bit of a scallywag, and he was always kind and generous. I have seen him painting on the street, and a mob come around him, and he never got frustrated or irritated with anyone, and especially children. And children can make it very difficult for you to paint on location if they find you fascinating. And who doesn't find a man that was well over 6'3", with his white goatee and his Scottish tan on? That's a fascinating looking character. And kids are very ready to go up to someone like that. And he showed the most patience. But I saw him lose a little bit of patience when he was working on the wonderful film that Russ and Nancy helped to produce, because they would do retakes. And one in particular was in Old Dover Days. He would always have a stand in Old Dover Days. And they said, we want you to walk up here carrying your paints and your little easel and set up over there. He made him do the take, I think, 5 or 6 times. And I was there, to which he said, I'm going to kill it. They can't get this goddamn thing right. Why am I the one that has the fits? So he could get a little frustrated, and he also thought, there were many letters, I think, he wrote to assorted government people about how they may not be doing things the way that he felt they should be done. So, I'm going to open it to questions, because I think everybody's going to have something to ask about any of his work. Before I do that, just make a note. These are some pretty working man pieces. When you see the guy, the gentleman making sausage, he's boiling the pigs. I like the soldier having his downtime with his arrow on his shoulder. The gentleman here with a bandaged hand, they're all fascinating. And the dancer, I got the idea from him, but Jack would go to a dance class or something of that nature where he could see people milling around, and he would record them as best he could, and that's what you're seeing. Yes? Yes?
I have a question for you about Jack's mediums. So I can tell that there's some oil paints in here, some gouache, watercolor. Can you talk about when and why he may have switched mediums?
The doctor told him if he kept painting with oil, he would die. So I think that was a bit of a cure. I don't know if it's the oil paint or if it was the turpentine or what. But he loved oil and worked a lot with it, especially in the early years. And then he just had to give it up, and he would say something like, I had to go with that, goddamn crook. He would let you know what he didn't care for. Like when he moved to Maine, he came down to visit us and he said, I can't paint those damn rocks. Because he'd been painting down here for decades and gets to Maine and there's rocks everywhere. Yes.
If I understood you correctly, you earlier in your presentation, you used the word rude to describe the occasionally was rude in its use of color, and I wondered what.
Garish might have been a better choice of word. Garish might have been a better choice.
Okay.
I've often used rude in the wrong places. Yes.
I'm not a painter, but I enjoy seeing art. Is that first painting there and then the boat, the white boat? Are those two different styles of painting? They don't look
No. No, I mean, you might have executed the paint a little different. When you use a gouache, you're gonna get more of a painterly effect as if you're using an acrylic, because the gouache is opaque, and you can actually create brush strokes. When you use a watercolor, that's supposed to be light and transparent. And Jack never called it a gouache, he always referred to those as his Italian watercolors. I'm not using my Italian watercolors.
So each one of these paintings, even though it could be different, like watercolor or acrylic or oil, are all like the same style of painting?
Well, to the untrained eye, you might have more difficulty. For me, I can look at a painting almost instantly and know if it was Jack's, or if it was done by someone trying to paint like Jack. Yes, it's all his language. It's like your handwriting. Sometimes your handwriting doesn't look exactly the same as it did, you know, an hour before or a day before. He was an interesting thing, he was also left-handed. And he broke his left hand, and I had never paid, shame on me, I had never paid attention to whether he was left-handed or not. And he came in with a pile of watercolors to the gallery for me, and he was cursing about his left hand, and I said, well, why is that a problem? He said, I had to paint these with my right hand. So he said, I'm okay painting with my right hand, it's just, I can't write with my right hand. So, and he, as you can see, so we have a nice grouping right here with these 6 paintings right here in the corner, and then you look at how abstracted he made this painting with the white boat, but it's still his. And he did that right on location. I have a feeling it was done in Lipstick or Little Creek, either one of those little towns, because he visited there a lot. A lot.
Is there a name for his style, like that, one of the corner there? To me, that looks so different than the other ones. Is there a name for this style, or is there, or, I know you're saying,
Well, he's a-
Louis style, but is there?
He does representational work. I try not to give things a specific name unless, you know, they're clearly an abstract, with no representation in it. But yes, I almost want to call him a naturalist because he painted what he saw, the way he saw it. But, no, he did representational work for the most part. There are actually a few abstractions that he's done. Oh, go ahead.
Was this license plate inspired by his paintings?
I know nothing of that license plate.
That's mine, sorry. That's,
That's just about the ditch.
yeah, that's a 10 by 20 inch ditch, they were 10 inches wide, 20 inches deep. I had that license plate made up, so just as a gag.
Yeah, Jack would have never done that painting. I can assure you. It's cute, but it's not him. But the Delaware Scene book is definitely Jack's. And he did some, that was one of his most popular books. And I don't think you can get them now, you know. Some people have copies, but it's a great book. And it features mostly the highly representational work because most of the work in there was done when he worked either for the government in some capacity or for including the CCC. But he was an interesting fellow. You also, I had many people that would come and say, I want to commission Jack to do a painting in my house or my neighborhood or whatever. And I would say, well, he doesn't do commissions, but I'll see what I can do. So what I would do is I would take him to the area where someone had requested he do a painting, and I said, you know, if you stand on this corner and you look south, I bet I can sell that painting. Which I already have a buyer. But you had to approach it the right way. I said, I have permission for you to paint this part of South State Street. I don't do that. And you can walk away. But no, I just would, and shift him and have him, isn't that a pretty line? Yes.
And what would that painting cost at that time?
Not enough is right. usually around $4,000 at that time. And that time was after, when we represented Jack and he had a few other galleries. And when he decided that he and Dorothy were going to move to Maine, they came to me and said, we want you to stay as our agent. And I said, I will only be your agent if I'm your only agent. I will gladly work with helping your work be sold in the other galleries if they want to collaborate or anything, but I can't do well by you if I've got somebody else trying to figure out how to make a sale that is counterproductive to what I can do for you. And that was probably the best thing. My husband and I did very well with our business with Jack, and as a matter of fact, we did one particular sale that was very large, and they added a bathroom, and they named it Becky's Banyo. I never got to see it or use it, but I was very happy that they were pleased with their new bathroom.
Is your gallery still in operation?
No, we closed it in 2015.
Becky,
Hi, Joe.
in the early 70s, we had a little extra money, and we went down to Jack's house, storybook house in Bridgeville, and we said we'd like to buy some paintings. And we went out back, or animal, and pulled, had hundreds. We got one from the 30s, one from the 40s, one from the 50s, and one from the 60s. I said, you gotta stop, because that's $400. $100 each, and I can't afford it.
And that's why I had him get rid of all his other agents. Yeah, he was. As a matter of fact, my husband, and we had a helper, and I went down with him a couple times, when they sold Storybook House, they thought they had put in the contract that they would have 6 months to empty the studio, and went off to Little Rock, Arkansas, which is where Dorothy's from. And then we got this phone call from them just a matter of days later, and they said, oh my God, they want the studio empty. So, what a mess. We went down there and we packed up all his studio, and we took care of everything that we could see. But we also knew from working with Jack that he tends to hide things. So my husband went up and really went through, Chris just went through everything, through the rafters, through everything, and he found little fold-up packets containing, 20 or 30 of the watercolors and drawings of the war, of the Pacific Corridor. I think once that commander was burning his stuff, those things he hid. He actually hid a number of other works too, and I think it was because he knew his weakness, like selling you 4 paintings for $400, and then he knew that if somebody saw a particular painting, he wouldn't be able to say no. He got in a lot of trouble with his wife and daughters because they thought the paintings were theirs, and then they come in the studio and find him trying to reproduce it, and he'd have to confess that he sold the original, which got him in the doghouse.
Where is his collection now? Is there all these paintings are found here?
His daughters have a number of them, yes. We loaded the truck and drove up. He sold a lot of work too. For instance, the Delaware scene, I don't think there's a single one of any of those paintings or drawings that is now available. Because since, yes, the state has a very extensive collection, hence Becky's Banyo. But they have a very beautiful collection, which is available to public offices. Is that correct? Yes. So for instance, there might be some paintings in Senator Carper's office, Coon's office. I'm sure Carney's got a few of Governor Carney's got a few of them up somewhere. So, yes, I think there might be some. And also the film that the S.U.N.Y did, which was wonderful. Everything is in the archives for the National Gallery, is that right? That's right?
Yeah.
There it is, yeah.
Where can you see that film?
That's a good question. Do we have, you can see it on YouTube?
No.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't know, Carol?
It's not on YouTube. I believe, like, I'm sure if you go to like Delaware Public Archives, you'd be able to view it, but I know that the National Gallery has its rights and so does the producer. But like we at the Art League, for example, don't have the rights to show it. Yeah.
That was fun. One of the old Dover days when they were filming, well, I think they really filmed only one, but it felt like about 3 years. They had the videographer in a wheelchair because that made it much smoother for the filming. So I look over and Russ is pushing the wheelchair with the videographer right through the parade for old Dover days. I just thought it was wonderful. And everybody said, oh, I'm sorry, and they just get out of it. And then later on, you saw the videographer walking around, getting some interesting work. Yes?
How did the murals in the state legislative hall, how did those get done?
Well, that's a fun story. And there was a big controversy with one of those. Jack was commissioned by the state to do murals representing certain historical events in the state of Delaware. And he came to us, because, you know, we were just blocks away and we were selling his work at that time, and asking what he should do, and he said, I'm thinking of painting them on sheetrock. I don't know how many of you have handled sheetrock, but it's not a good thought. To which my husband, who handles all the framing, said, no, Jack, whatever you do, don't paint them on sheetrock. So eventually we were helping to hang all those sheetrock murals. So you would get them in place and you literally had to screw them, if I'm not mistaken. My husband can tell you more about that.
The state boys were putting screws in.
Yeah, the union.
And they were 4 by 8 feet.
This is my husband, Chris.
And so they're huge and they weighed a ton and they had to go up 30 feet. So I'm working with the guys from the state and we get a mural halfway up because we had to use block and tackle. And they'd look at it, it's time for a break. I'd be like, you gotta be kidding me. And they'd literally come down off the scaffold and the painting would just be suspended in air for half an hour or whatever. But Jack wouldn't listen. He did them all on sheetrock. Then he brings me molding from Simpson Lumber.
It's not picture frame.
Well, no, it was crown molding. He goes, this is what I want on them. Like, there's no lip in this, Jack. There's no rabbit. I don't know how this is gonna work. He goes, you'll make it work. So the project was a nightmare, but it was typical Jack, you know, and we pulled it all off. And Becky can tell you about, there was a huge controversy about one of the paintings, and it's a great story if you have time.
Right, it was, so one of the events Jack reported was called Cooch's Bridge. So he did the painting. Well, Mr. Cooch saw a picture of the painting, or saw the painting, and he's like, you can't hang that up. Cooch's Bridge was the first battle where they had the new American flag. We're talking an old battle. Revolutionary. And Jack had already done his history. He had already researched, and he said, that's not true. It wasn't at the battle. And it went back and forth, and Mr. Cooch, I think, made some sort of suggestion that maybe there was something the state wanted him to do that he might not do if that painting went up. And it made the New York Times, the argument. So spitting, sputtering, and saying things I cannot say, Jack repainted the painting and put the flag in. And eventually it came out, no, the flag was never there. It was never there. And I wish we could switch it out. I do have access to the painting, but the state's got the wrong one.
And I'm not switching it.
As you can imagine, Jack was a wonderful fellow who seemed very easygoing until you hit a wall with it. And then you had to handle him with the kid gloves, maybe back up a little bit and figure out how to phrase things such as if you look this way and do a painting, I can sell it. But, you didn't want Jack mad at you, and even if he got mad at you, he might say something to you, and then the next day he's good as gold, just don't bring the subject up. Any other questions? Thank you very much. If you think of something, I'm gonna be here, I can talk to you about any one of these paintings. My original idea was to walk around, but I don't think so. It's a little tight.